There are many ways to share and communicate your research. The traditional means of sharing data or publications is through publishing in a scientific journal, a process that you as a researcher are very familiar with. However, there are a number of other ways you can share and communicate your research. For example, you can communicate your research by blogging, vlogging, tweeting, or by sharing your work on other social media platforms. These communication platforms are all relatively new to science, and while some of you might be quite experienced at using them, some of you might be skeptical about the value of using them to communicate about your work. So what is the value of using social media and sharing platforms to communicate your research? Well, in principle you could say the more people that come into contact with my work, the more people will read it. But who are these people? Are they colleagues, competitors, or people that I have never even considered to have an interest in my work? Are they at all interested in my work? Well, answers to these questions might lie in next generation metrics. Next generation metrics, also known as old metrics, are statistical analyses of digital publications. In scientific publishing, traditional or classic citation impact metrics refer to, for example, the impact factor or the age index of scientific publications. These traditional metrics can be quite useful and are widely used measures of the impact of scientific publications. Unfortunately, measuring a specific article's impact through citation counts is a relatively slow process. It might take years for an article to get a significant amount of citations. Also, the amount of scientific articles that are being published each year is growing exponentially, as is shown by the work of Bornman and Moots. For that reason, a faster measurement of the impact of an article could be very beneficial to both the author as well as to the development of the field he or she publishes in. So how do next generation metrics fit in? Well, next generation metrics are defined as statistics derived from data that is collected by measuring where and how often a digital publication is mentioned, cited, or used on a digital platform. Such platforms can include social media, online news media, and online reference managers. So one could argue that next generation metrics effectively measure the public attention a research article receives, where and how people are discussing a research article, and possibly even the influence on the research field of the article. And thus, they can provide a much more detailed and timely picture of an article's impact. But even though this might sound like a very effective way of measuring the impact of your digitally published work, you might still be skeptical of the value of next generation metrics. And that is not completely unjustified, because next generation metrics certainly do have their limitations. The fact that some of you might never even have heard of next generation metrics before only demonstrates that this is a novel way of measuring research impact. There is still no golden standard to determine what can and what cannot be concluded from next generation metrics. Only by more thoroughly analyzing why something is shared online, you could be able to find out the actual value of it. And perhaps even then, next generation metrics might not always give the whole story. In the current practice of using scientific impact measures, it cannot completely replace citation-based metrics or informed peer review as a measure of impact. So we advise you to consider next generation metrics as just an additional tool. And unfortunately, like any other metrics, next generation metrics also have the potential for gaming, influencing the metrics of a publication by fabricating large amount of reach and mentions of the publication. So you can never simply assume that an article with a lot of next generation metrics traffic must have a huge impact. It is always important to also look at the analysis to see who discusses a publication and what they are actually saying. But even considering the limitations of next generation metrics and keeping these in mind when tracking your research output, you definitely will find a number of advantages in measuring next generation metrics of your digital publication. You can track other output than just journal articles. For example, you can track your presentations, your datasets, or your software if you publish them online. Next generation metrics are accumulated very quickly because they are sourced from the web. So you can start measuring next generation metrics as soon as an article is published online. Next generation metrics also measure a more diverse impact. You can measure how a published work is being cited, used, or mentioned on platforms that you yourself might not have even have considered. So far, this discussion has been mostly conceptual. I hope that by now you are curious about next generation metrics and that you want to check out one of your own publications. So let's talk about how to track next generation metrics. Currently, there are two major companies that perform next generation metrics analyses, each with their own specific focus. The first one is named Altmetric. You might have seen this colorful circle before when searching for research papers online. This is a next generation metrics analysis performed by the company Digital Science. A number of bibliographic databases make use of Altmetric data to provide additional information for publications. So if you want to use this software, make sure you upload it to a digital database that uses Altmetric. Another company that performs next generation metrics analysis is called Plum Analytics. This company has recently been acquired by Elsevier, and their next generation metrics are now available for research articles published in Elsevier journals, but can also be seen in Scopus, another large multidisciplinary bibliographic database. When you find a research paper in the Elsevier database, you will see this image of PlumX. This is the analytical tool developed by the company that you can use to view the next generation metrics of your research paper if it is published in an Elsevier journal. So, are you interested in finding out who is using your work or talking about it? Or do you want to share your work on social media platforms and see how this affects your visibility as a researcher? Try to track the next generation metrics. You might be surprised to find out how many people are interested in what you do and who they are. It might even serve as a springboard for forming new collaborations with colleagues, industry, or government.